Hi, and welcome to another edition of Seniors Today. I'm your host, Tom Bartee, and today our guest is Mr. Ronnie Stewart, who's the Executive Director of the West Coast Blues Society. How you doing, Ronnie?
Tom, I'm doing great since I'm here with you.
Yeah, right. Well, we go way back, so I'm going to try not to make any kind of crazy statements about either one of ours shady past. But
Okay.
Anyway, welcome to the show, Ronnie.
And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So maybe we could start out a little bit about you talking about the history of your involvement with promoting the blues in the Bay Area.
Well, yeah, we actually saw a need to perpetuate the history of particularly Northern California blues and its contribution to the whole sound that's known as the West Coast blues sound. I'm sure a lot of your listening audience heard of Chicago blues sound, the Texas blues sound, of course, where it all started, the Mississippi Delta blues sound. But California have a sound that's indigenous to its California. When they came out, a lot of the African Americans came out to work at Todd Shipyard, Kaiser Shipyards, and Vallejo Shipyards during the 40s. They brought with them their instruments. So California ended up being a melting pot of different styles. You had people who played the instruments from Mississippi, Texas, and when they came here to clubs in Vallejo, clubs in Oakland, they sort of created a whole new sound, which the sound became a sound that's indigenous to the West Coast. Heavy horns, sort of jazzy, a little bit more, I use the metaphor sophisticated, a little bit more sophisticated than Chicago blues because San Francisco was really into jazz. There was a lot of supper clubs, a lot of jazz clubs. And then Oakland had what we call more of a down-home feel. So on Sundays, here in Vallejo, they had jam sessions. In Oakland, they had jam sessions. And that's when all these musicians would come together. And again, they created what's known as West Coast blues. We saw a need historically to perpetuate that art form and also put us on the cultural map as one of the sounds indigenous to America. As I said, Chicago blues sound, Delta blues sound, Texas blues sound. So we saw a need to do programming that sort of emphasize and programming that showcase all these different talents and styles that's found in California. So we came up, also as a need for a lot of musicians to get different, to get to play. So we came up with, at the time, the Bay Area Blues Society, and we became so regional, we changed it to the West Coast Blues Society because we started programming in Oregon, started programming in Washington, and we have a program called Blues in the Schools, and we was going all over California. So we said we saw a need to where we should change our name because we're regional. And it's more palatable for different municipalities when we come in the city rather than to say we're from the Bay Area, to say we are the West Coast. And that made it sort of more easy to do programming. Mm-hmm. So we also saw a need to honor different musicians who contributed to West Coast Blues. So we came up with a novel approach, just like the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. We came up with the West Coast, with the music they played on 7th Street, Oakland Walk of Fame. 20-year project, $8 million. One of the few projects that when it comes to blues, that much money was dedicated. It's at 7th Street, right at the 7th Street, 7th and Center BART station in Oakland. It's 88 plaques, and we done a matrix of all the great artists from Billie Holiday to names that no one ever heard of, but they performed in Oakland all their lives. So we had B.B. King. We have this little girl who used to open up for B.B. King at Slim Jenkins, and she went on to make it. Her father would be doing revivals, these gospel revivals at the Oakland Auditorium, and she'd come and open up for B.B. King. That little girl was from Detroit. Her name was Aretha Franklin.
Oh, just a little girl.
Yeah, and she was about 17, 16, and she'd come to Slim Jenkins. So we said, this history of 7th Street is important. And so they said, let's do a 7th Street Walk of Fame. Let's get all the names of all the great people who performed on 7th Street. So Louis Jordan, Ray Charles, Charles Brown, Bobby Blue Bland, Al Green, his first West Coast appearance was on 7th Street. So
Ronnie Stewart.
Well,
there's room for one more plaque.
I'm one of the ones who wasn't a household name. I wasn't no Ray Charles or no B.B. King. But matter of fact, our second phase, ironically, they made me have my name on it. I don't like to be self-serving since I'm the one who's doing it.
Yeah, I can just see him forcing you to do it.
Yeah, they twisted my arm. And
Okay.
I play guitar, so I didn't want them to twist this arm.
Yeah.
So I went on and said, yeah, I have my name on the second phase. But so we created the Vallejo Blues and Heritage Festival, again, to perpetuate the history of Vallejo, its contribution to the West Coast. When you talk about West Coast blues, one have to think about the most important thing when you're trying to geographically connect sounds. You think about the cities, the municipalities that was connected. So Oakland, Vallejo, Russell City, Berkeley, Richmond. Them was the towns where they had the clubs. Them was the towns where they had the jam sessions. Them were the towns where they would come and bring all these different sounds together. And I thought Vallejo have always had a unique situation because Vallejo and Oakland kind of parallel. They'd come here to work in the maritime industry, and on their time off. And you got to remember, during the war, Jimmy Witherspoon, he lived up here, and he told me, he said, you know, Ronnie, we could pick our shift based on the times that we would play at the clubs, like clubs here called like the Y Club and different clubs in Vallejo that was very popular. And a lot of people talk about John Lee Hooker, but John Lee Hooker came here basically in the 80s, you know, late 70s, early 80s. But Johnny Otis was the one who really put Vallejo, Johnny Otis and of course Sly and the Family Stone put Vallejo on the musical map forever. So that sort of history, we had to bring that to the public because Johnny Otis, he discovered Etta James and Hank Ballard, who done the twist before Chubby Checker.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it was a hit in the black community, but black record charts, it could be #1 in the white community, so they wanted to bridge that gap. So Dick Clark said, I need a young, vibrant looking artist. So he got Chubby Checker, who was young, had a big baby face, you know, and he had him to do the twist, but we had been doing the twist in the black community for years. And it was about 3 or 4 years difference in the twist. And then it came out again. Chubby Checker was singing the twist. And so, again, all these roots leading back to Vallejo, all these roots leading to Oakland, and no one had never really put it together in a curriculum type form, you know, in an educational piece. So we decided to start the Blues Society. We started off Bay Area Blues Society. Me and Cool Papa Sadler started it, and we've been programming ever since. As I said, 3 years ago, we changed over to the West Coast Blues Society because of our map got bigger. Our footprint got much bigger on the West Coast. And but some of our highlights has been the Vallejo Blues and Heritage Festival because we educated a lot of people about, I mean, you have the standard, I know Confunction, I know Johnny Otis, but they are big contributors, but Vallejo still had a lot of contributions to talk about and to explore.
So how many years did you do the Bay Area or the Vallejo Blues Heritage Festival?
About 3 or 4 years.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and basically, I would say because of funding, it was so hard to get funding. And we done, after it was over with, we done what I learned later was called sticker shock. We had it free for a couple of years. Then when we started charging, the citizens of Vallejo didn't, I think it was like $10 or whatever number it was, they didn't want to pay. So I learned whatever way you start, you end. Never, if you're gonna have a free festival, keep it free. If you can have a charge festival, keep charging. Because the public, the consumer, they sort of don't like it.
The same thing happened with the Vallejo Jazz Festival, where it was free for a number of years. And
Right.
once they started charging, it changed the audience, and it changed the attendance dramatically.
Right,
And so then the vendors were impacted, and
right.
you know, it just went on from there.
That's the same with us.
So you mentioned Russell City earlier. Where geographically, where is Russell City?
Again, for your listening audience, if they know anything about West Winton or East Winton, where Southland Mall is one of the biggest malls in California, that's the area that Russell City once was. Russell City from Southland Mall all the way back to the Bay was called Russell City. It was started by a Swedish immigrant named Joel Russell. he bought up all the plots, hundreds and hundreds of plots, about, I guess I would say probably 100 acres worth of land or more. And he named it, of course, Russell City. He never truly got it incorporated, but it was acting as if it was a town. So
is that kind of like Hayward area?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it's Hayward. Again,
Yeah.
Southland Mall is Hayward.
Yeah.
And it's currently called, the street now is called Winton, what used to be Russell Road. But a unique situation there, and this is just for the history. The first time eminent domain was used on a whole area, usually eminent domain might be used on a block or a section. Eminent domain was put on the whole city of Russell City, every step of, every inch of it, which till this day has never been done. And that's like if they put eminent domain on all of Vallejo.
Did they level all the
Yes,
housing?
they did. They leveled all the houses, they moved all the street names, and the uniqueness about Russell City was that Etta James, John Lee Hooker, T-Bone Walker, all the artists, when they'd come from the South and to live in the Bay Area, they'd go to Russell City to find their friends, to get a band, to get musicians, and to jam. And it was rural as you could get. Like this guy said, he said, man, I went there, I smelled them hogs, I saw them homemade gardens, I saw the pigs. He said, I thought I was still sharecropping in Alabama or Mississippi. It afforded them to be home away from home. And he said, man, we was making $3 an hour. He said, back home we was making 50 cents an hour. He said, we was making all this money. I was working in the maritime industry and playing my music. He said, I was in heaven, you know, making $3 an hour, $4 an hour at the different shipyards.
So it started as a Swedish community and then ended up being.
Well, no, he was a Swedish immigrant, but the land that he bought, he sold it to because they had redlining, so blacks and Mexicans couldn't live in Hayward. It was, you know, the redlining situation. So he sold most of his plots to black and Mexicans and a few white people, but 80% black and Mexican, about 20% white.
So they renamed a couple local streets after him. It's like, yeah, sure, you betcha Boulevard and Don't You Know Avenue.
No,
A Swedish thing.
You know, one thing. No, they didn't. Actually, it's one little short street off Foothill. It's called Russell Street. They didn't call it Russell City Street. They called it Russell Street, which almost is an insult. But Winton, it was like they was trying to erase history. They had all these streets, they had all these names and everything, and then you got Emory Freight, 3M, FedEx. It was perfect. It had, of course, any area like that, the tracks went right through there. So they had rail, they had Highway 17, currently 880. You were 8 minutes, 10 minutes from the Oakland airport.
Yeah.
So it's perfect for shipping, perfectly for rail, perfectly for trucking, because you 2 minutes from the freeway, you are right on the freeway. Where Southland Mall located now was an orchard of pears and fruits, you know. And what everybody talked about Russell City was the ruralness. It was bootleg wiring, dirt floors, you know. It was just a club away from home. It was
Pretty cool history.
Yeah, and when you talk about Etta James used to be shooting dice and beating all the guys out there, shooting dice in front of the club, and all the other crazy stuff that go along with that kind of area.
Are there any books that have been written about some of this
Yes,
history?
Maria Ocholo, which actually was the mayor's wife, she done a book about Russell City. It's the same publisher that does the book about Vallejo, that same publisher. It's kind of a template book where you can only have like 50 pictures and a certain amount of characters in the whole book. I'm also writing a book. She done Russell City, the lifestyle sort of Russell City. She didn't dab in the history of the music. I kind of wanted to save that for me. Ironically, Russell City was more popular than the city of Hayward because Big Mama Thornton, T-Bone Walker, when they go to Europe, they would ask them, what was your biggest lesson in music, or where you really learned how to perform? And she'd mention Russell City to the BBC. She'd say, that old club. And one time she said to the BBC, she said, you know, she done Hound Dog.
That's Mama Thornton?
Big Mama Thornton. She wrote, You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. Her and Johnny Otis wrote it at a restaurant one morning. And Elvis Presley was it was 1956. He was at the Oakland Auditorium, and $50,000 in the 50s was like 200,000 now, or 300,000. So Big Mama Thornton say, Elvis Presley's downtown tonight making 50,000, and I'm out here making $15 a night. And he's singing my song. But that's the whole irony of the music industry in that sense. But she was out in Russell City making $15 a night. Everybody in the band make, you know.
Well, that example also kind of shows that there is an evolution from blues to rock and roll.
Right.
And, you know, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah, I do. I've written about that. You know, I've done lectures at UC Berkeley and Stanford about that. I work with UC Berkeley Oral History Department, and we went through that thorough. But we just lost the founding father of rock and roll, which is Chuck Berry, as you know.
Yeah.
And
well, he was humble about it, saying that it wasn't him.
Yeah.
That it was others, and it was a movement.
Little Richard, it was. And you know,
Yeah.
to be honest, the first rock and roll record was Ike Turner. Oh, Buick 88 or Oldsmobile 88 or something. Rocket 88.
Rockin' 88?
Rocket 88, the first rock and roll song. Then Jerry Lee, Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, believe it or not, Chuck Berry was rockabilly. He wasn't truly a rock and roll artist. Little Richard was truly a rock and roll, Fats Domino, but Chuck Berry was more of the kind of hillbilly white kind of music. If you really listen to his music, if you really define his music, he was in the rock and roll gender. He was soul because he was on Chess Records, which is a staunch blues label. You know, Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters, Coco Taylor, you name them, they was on Chess Records. Even Etta James recorded at last on Chess Records. But Chuck Berry was, again, rockabilly. He was kind of a hillbilly rock and roll. Mm-hmm. But the real, I think, who I give it to Ike Turner, and I give it to Little Richard. You know, because Elvis Presley was influenced by by Ike Turner. He was influenced by Little Richard. He was influenced by Bobby Bland, Little Junior Parker. He loved him, and they was all rock and roll and blues artists. Mm-hmm. Not to drift too much, but getting back to the contributions, why we started was the fact that what are we talking about now? A lot of people don't know and understand this, and I think it's extremely important because at least Richmond, San Francisco, Oakland get a lot of praise, and poor little Vallejo never got a historical praise. And a lot of the European writers, they would come to Oakland and write about, you know, Oakland and then write about Richmond, never mentioning Vallejo, never. Mm-hmm. And I'm not bragging, but we've put a lot of identification. That our Vallejo Blues and Heritage Festival created a lot of print media, created a lot of awareness, created a lot of, you know, radio talk and being played on the air. A lot of people didn't know Johnny Otis was born here in Vallejo. Mm. And Johnny Otis had the father of funk guitar in his band when he done Wooly and the Po' Boy, you know, Hand Jive and all them hits, Hand Jive, doing that crazy hand jive. That was Jimmy Nolan on guitar. Jimmy Nolan left Johnny Otis and went with James Brown, and that's him on Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. That's the first ever official funk song. It's Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. That changed the face of black music. That changed the face of blues music. It's never been the same. And to this day, Confunction, Lakeside, you know, Biana, Alicia Keys, all them bands still use the ninth chord. When it's funk, you know, Bruno Mars, his sound's really close to James Brown because of Jimmy Nolan. That sound is still with us and it'll be with us as long as music goes on.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you're working on a book?
Yeah, my book is it's called Russell City, the Town That Lost the Blues. And it's going to chronicle about some of the issues from a political standpoint, how they got money from redevelopment, they got money from Washington, and they spent not too much producing putting people out. They was threatening them, telling them, you better move if you Mexicans. And this is in the 50s.
And then the redevelopment.
Mm-hmm. The redevelopment was giving them way below market money for their plots. Some of them had a quarter of an acre, some of them had an acre. Some of them had 3/4 of an acre. But you know, in them days, they could, like their wife have a baby, they could say, okay, we got a kid coming, let's build another room. They didn't have to have no plans, they didn't have no inspections, they just go down to the lumber yard or get some plywood and just build another room. No inspectors.
Well, that's cool. So the West Coast Blues Society also has connections to a ton of current artists, musicians, and I know that you have a standing band that represents the society. What's the name of that group?
The Caravan of All Stars.
Caravan of All Stars?
Caravan of All Stars was created, when I started, me and Coop Papa started in 1985. A lot of these artists, they are artists. A true artist is not a businessman. Because of that, they didn't have the luxury of knowing what, some of them didn't really, I hate to say it, they didn't even know what a publicist was. They didn't know what a press release was. They didn't know the importance of good sound. They didn't know the importance of good business. They was just music.